Welcome to ACURA. I'm James Carden. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by Ben Schwarz, who joined the board of the American Committee about a year ago. Um,
Yeah.
for those of you who are not familiar, Ben was the national and literary editor of The Atlantic magazine and the executive editor of World Policy Journal. From 2014 through 2017, he was the national editor of the American Conservative magazine. Prior to that, Ben was for 7 years a foreign policy and national security analyst at the Rand Corporation. At Rand, he wrote a widely cited and highly critical assessment of American counterinsurgency doctrine and practice. Before his time at Rand, he was a staff member at the Brookings Institution. So Ben brings to bear a lot of knowledge on U.S. foreign policy matters, and I thought it was a good idea to bring him on to discuss what U.S. foreign policy might look like under the incoming Trump administration. And we're going to talk some about Mr. Trump's appointments and try to tease out the implications of what that might all mean for the future. So Ben, thanks very much for joining us.
Oh, James, it's a pleasure to talk with you. I'm extremely curious to hear your thoughts on these matters as well. So I've been really looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks. So this has been a busy couple of days in the transition in Trump world. Mr. Trump has named his appointees or his nominees for Secretary of State, which would be Florida Senator Marco Rubio. Mike Walls is going to be his national security advisor. Walls is a congressman from Florida with military experience, and he has named a veteran who is also a Fox News fixture as his defense secretary. Yesterday, in a surprise, but in my view, welcome move, he also named Tulsi Gabbard as director of national intelligence. She will oversee the 17 U.S. intelligence agencies, among them the CIA, which is going to be, should he be confirmed, going to be headed by John Ratcliffe. So, Ben, broadly speaking, what to make of these appointments? Do you see continuity or change with Trump 1, between Trump 1 and Trump 2?
Well, we were just talking very briefly before we started recording, and I didn't exactly know what to expect from Trump 2. I was hoping Trump 2 was not going to make, and I'm going to try to be as neutral as possible in my assessments, but I think so. I was going to use the term mistakes. I was hoping that Trump 2 wouldn't make the same mistakes that Trump 1 made, and by mistakes I mean no matter if one were with Trump or against Trump, if whatever that means, and we'll get into that, I'm sure, in this discussion. It seems that many of the appointments in Trump 1 frustrated at least the professed policies and point of view that Trump had said he wanted to pursue. And this was true across the board, but was especially true in foreign policy. So I was still kind of expecting that some um, uh, fixtures of the conservative or Republican defense establishment would be appointed, and with defense and foreign policy. And with the exception of Marco Rubio, Trump has not gone in that direction. I'm a little puzzled, though, by what direction he has gone in. And again, I'm trying to be as neutral as possible in my assessments. I guess I was especially surprised and troubled by the uh, uh, defense secretary nominee, in that I would have thought that Trump, with his business experience and knowledge, would at least go for a safer choice in that, this is a incredibly complex job. This must be, is this the large, is this certainly the largest bureaucracy in the US government. It's responsible for the bulk of non-discretionary federal spending. It's a vast organization, and it's traditionally gone to figures who have a lot of experience in defense policy and defense politics, either as sort of chairman or ranking member or senior members of the armed services, Senate or House Armed Services committees, or sort of big business leaders like Carlucci or McNamara. And I certainly understand that in the past, a lot of those appointments that you would think, well, those didn't pursue weren't particularly successful in their jobs. And in the case of a few of them, Don Rumsfeld and Robert McNamara come to mind, were absolutely disastrous. But in that case, again, perhaps I shouldn't be that surprised in that Trump is going for he at least discerns that often the safe pick might not be the right pick. I do wish that it was someone who kind of knew and understood this really, really vast,
Bureaucracy. Yeah.
yeah, and this gigantic job. I mean, this must be the biggest management position in the world in a lot of ways. So whatever one can say, I don't think that his nominee has vast management experience. And then to just go through the other figures, I mean, as I said, with Marco Rubio, I can understand if Rubio's position on a lot of issues has changed or modified recently. But for those who want or who expect sort of an anti-establishment figure to be running U.S. foreign policy, or at the sort of the figurehead of U.S. foreign policy, I don't think Rubio would be one's pick. Waltz, again, I'm not that familiar with his career, but I do know he wasn't he sort of head of defense policy under both Gates and Rumsfeld? I believe he was defense policy director or something like that. I think I read that in Reuters, but I may be.
Yeah.
But again, that would, if Trump ran in 2016 in opposition to the very policies that Rumsfeld and Gates were pursuing, or had pursued. So I had pursued. So I would be. It seems an odd choice in that matter. He seems, with both his NSC and well, with his NSC choice, to be really pursuing almost his domestic agenda in that both Waltz and I guess Hegseth as well have been very critical of the armed services and the Defense Department's pursuit of what they would call, woke policies. So, and it would seem though that that's sort of ancillary. That concern is sort of ancillary in every way to the most important matters that these figures are going to be dealing with.
Yeah, I think that's right. And with regard to Waltz's previous experience. You're exactly right. He was a director on the policy staffs um, under Gates,
Mhm, mhm.
Rumsfeld, which is basically a mid-level sort of policy job.
Right, right. I understand he wasn't
You know what?
directing policy, but
Yeah,
he was he's certainly not from a wing of the party that one that as far as foreign and defense policy specifically, that Trump is identified with,
yeah,
as opposed to, again, domestic matters where he does seem very much on board
yeah. I
with.
mean, just before you mentioned Trump's professed views on policy, and I think that that's a good word for it because he kind of markets himself as an America first sort of guy. A lot of people in the kind of the realist and restrainer world had some hope that the appointments would be different and be going more their way. Within the transition, the word on the street is that there's basically two camps. There's the Don Jr., JD Vance, Tulsi Gabbard, Bobby Kennedy wing of the transition, and then you have the more establishment types or the more mainstream corporate types like Howard Lutnick, Linda McMahon, and people like that. And it seems like the McMahon Lutnick sort of side of things are getting their way over the Don Jr., JD Vance, more America First sort of camp. And what seems to me, though, to be the most important through line of all of the important national security and defense appointments, very much including Tulsi Gabbard, is their professed hostility towards Iran. And it seems to me to be that it's very possible that Eastern Europe and China are going to take a back seat for a renewed and possibly very damaging adventure in the Middle East. And that's kind of my worry when I look at this series of appointments. I wonder what you make of
I
that, how we
it,
might.
it's No, I was just it's interesting because that's first to go back just a moment. Do you think that um, that the the other the non-realist restrainer, etc. wing would have looked to these figures? I mean, these figures seem to be more, in some ways, again, for better or for worse, kind of domestic red meat appointments. I mean, in other words, that if they've, it's not as if they have articulated views that are necessarily different from the more, I hate to, because it's not really the establishment wing, but we should, the non, but the non-restrainer wing of the Trump.
Yeah, like the remaining neoconservatives that are still in the
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so it's not that they fall within that. I mean, they happen to mostly embrace or did embrace views before they somewhat altered their views in ways that sort of coincided with the emergence of Trump as probably the presumptive Republican nominee. But I would have thought that that Lutnick, et cetera, would have been happier or would have with figures that again advance their preferred positions, but were more um, steady establishment and had more experience.
Yeah, yeah,
We're Yeah, but now but of course, I mean, it's interesting that because I would have thought with that the through line would have been China. It's interesting that you say Iran, and honestly, that this is, I think that's an extremely interesting and important point that eluded me because I was kind of following the kind of the conventional coverage where nominee after nominee, with the exception of Tulsi Gabbard, has issued extremely hardline statements regarding China policy. Now, I don't know, when I say with the exception of Tulsi Gabbard, I don't know what her, honestly, what the positions that she's advanced on China policy. And as far as China policy goes, it does seem that it's very puzzling. I mean, we'd be going out of the frying pan into the fire, assuming there's going to be some resolution or certainly energetic attempt at a resolution to the conflict in Ukraine. But in a way, will be. But you're absolutely right to identify Iran as a consistent sort of an aggressive policy toward Iran as a consistent um, uh, aspect of the Trump foreign policy team, and one that is the most immediate issue, obviously, that the administration will grapple with. I mean, I assume that um, that a China policy is going to be sort of the hallmark of the sort of at least the great power aspect
Mhm.
of the Trump administration. But Iran will either land in their lap or will be something that they will more immediately have to deal with or feel they must deal with.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I
so
think,
that, yeah, that's very concerning.
yeah, I think Iran has the possibility of derailing all of their other plans for what, whatever those plans are, because it's a great, looking at these appointments, it's kind of a great mystery, where these people came from and like who was pitching them, because given their views, it's not like there's a shortage of people in the Senate or the House that have these views. So,
Right.
they all seem to have television in common, which is very Trumpian, I suppose. But uh,
Yeah.
I,
They, but do they all, don't they also have that at least that um, real hostility? And I'm not suggesting in any way that that hostility is necessarily um, inappropriate, but to what they regard as sort of the culture war, the woke aspects of, which is weird, the woke aspects, I was going to say of defense policy, but the woke aspects of policies that the Pentagon, personnel policies and promotion policies, et cetera, that the Pentagon has pushed, and which again kind of, I mean, so your point is a good one. I mean, is clearly a good one, except isn't that I'm somewhat concerned that the appointments were made to because of out of Trump's interest in pursuing this, as I said before, sort of secondary or tertiary aspect of defense policy. But um, but you're right. I mean, I guess that's ultimately why I was so puzzled by these appointments, is that you could have picked much more. You could have picked sort of China hardliners, people who had at least at some point in their recent careers um, been quite hardline toward Russia, and you could have picked Iran hardliners who would have been much more um, uh, uh, acceptable choices
yeah,
for the, just for for Congress, which is kind of important. I mean, and I think, Trump is going to have, with some of these appointments, is going to, some of or figures in his own party are going to have to swallow hard, not for policy reasons, but simply because if they approve these appointments, that they're going to have to swallow hard because I think they're going to think that these are not the most appropriate figures to be running these organizations.
Yeah. I think,
Obviously, with the exception of Rubio, who I think is going to, so yeah, I mean, in some ways, and I'm sort of jumping all over the place, but in some ways, Rubio, you almost have to wonder, well, why? I mean, if he's going, Rubio is inconsistent with these other appointments in that, if for no other reason, just the ease with which Rubio is going to be confirmed, or so I mean, so that's an understandable reason to pick Rubio. But if you're going to pick Rubio for that reason, why be almost needlessly antagonistic or needlessly difficult with these other appointments?
that's right. I do think, again, you point out, and I think correctly, and it's a really good point with regard to the culture war aspect to a lot of these appointments. I do think that domestic politics and family politics played a role in the Rubio selection.
Oh,
By that,
sure.
and what I'm talking about is that Laura Trump wants to be senator. So this,
Yes, yes,
and I think that they see Rubio
yeah.
as sort of a malleable type who they can kind of roll and control.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so, that would appeal to the Trump people as well. I don't expect Marco Rubio to be making a lot of waves. He's very much a conventional, he's a neocon in some ways, and he's very much a Republican kind of Romney-like internationalist in other ways. Uh,
Right.
Not my cup of tea, but there it is. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
it at the very least looks and acts the part, which again is very important. It would seem in Trump world. Um, I guess in the remaining minutes that we have left, since this is a program of the American Committee for U.S. Russia Accord, we'll have to turn inevitably to Russia and Ukraine. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are with regard to the future of that conflict under Donald Trump. He recently had a phone call with Ukrainian President Zelensky, in which oddly and worryingly Elon Musk was on the line for it, and um, they seem to have some sort of half-baked peace deal, which Zelensky immediately immediately rejected. Trump talks a lot about how the war never would have started if he was in charge, and that he's gonna end it in 24 hours. Um, how about back on Earth? What do we think that uh, the Trump administration? How do you think they're going to handle this ongoing catastrophe in Eastern Europe?
Well, James, one of the main reasons I was so eager to talk with you today was to get your thoughts on the same. We haven't really talked about that sort of what, with Trump in power, uh, what is going to change. And I guess first, I mean, that promise of ending the war in 24 hours is going to kind of haunt him now, isn't it? I mean, he's got it's the for better or worse. Well, I mean, I could see it's interesting. I could uh Trump is going to it's the combination of carrots and sticks that I'm somewhat worried about. I could see Trump in some ways, and I'm trying to be neutral about this again, sensibly um, um, threatening Putin with some with the stick. I mean, in terms of I guess the most worrisome thing would be U.S. support for the long range missiles, which would require U.S. satellite targeting, which would just be incredibly, as they say, destabilizing, but really would be. I mean, this would just be. I don't know what it's difficult to know what are sort of what are the other sticks that Trump um, can use to get Putin to the negotiating table. And as far as another thing I am concerned about is and I want to ask you about this really specifically, leaving aside, this is almost one of these, as often one's confronted with foreign policy problems, it's, well, look, this may have been an awful mistake to begin with, but we're saddled with it now. What are the terms that Zelensky can domestically accept? And do you see a problem with Ukraine becoming really ungovernable? In that, given a likely reaction to any kind of terms that would be meaningful uh, for any kind of midterm settlement of the conflict. So I'm curious about what do you see are Trump's realistic options, and where do you see, where are they going to leave Ukraine domestically, or is my concern about that misplaced?
I don't think it's misplaced at all. I think that it's almost an impossible problem, because what you have on the one hand are Ukraine, which is demanding NATO membership. That is an absolute no-go for Russia. Russia has already annexed the 4 oblasts of Ukraine. They're keeping them. Ukraine wants them back. There's no room for compromise on those 2 issues on either side. So the question is, how do you make progress on that? And it seems to me that we've gotten to the point where, with the Republicans in Congress now and the Trump administration, I think that the money is about to dry up for them. I don't really foresee these enormous aid packages coming through any longer. So I think that Zelensky, who has the weaker hand by far, and let's not forget the reporting with regard to the casualties suffered by Ukraine are underreported and extremely dishonest.
Right.
The estimates that I've heard from military people is that the deaths are over 500,000. So, I mean, it's been absolutely enormous. They can't really raise an army anymore. People are in hiding. So they're in a terrible position. So, what do you do? I think that he's going to have to be talked out of his demand for NATO membership, and he's going to have to rely on bilateral defense agreements with the powers nearest Ukraine. With regard to the territory, the Russians are never going to give it back, and there's a good chance that they're going to take more. And there's a very good chance that if Zelensky comes to some sort of agreement, that A, gives up the land, or B, abandons NATO aspirations, that he'll get killed by his own. Never mind. So Ukraine is in a even weaker position now than it was in February of 2022. So this is a really difficult foreign policy problem, but it seems to me anyway, that it isn't up to the United States anymore. And
Unless the United States, I mean, I don't know, any kind of, it would seem that that from the Ukrainian point of view, there have to be some kind of security, if not guarantees, then at least like professed um, uh, 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 professions of goodwill on the part of other powers. I don't know. The United States cannot or should not be issuing such guarantees. I can't imagine it would. Um, and as you said, that leaves, I think, in some ways, I'd be a little, I don't know what the Ukrainians would think of, say, Poland um, issuing any kind of guarantee or even strong professions of goodwill in on behalf of defending Ukraine. I mean that seems a no-go as well. I don't know, and as you pointed out, I mean, given the weakness of Ukraine's position, given the domestic the U.S. domestic political reality that the support is going to be greatly diminished, if not in future. It's difficult to know what exactly Russia can't be pushed all that hard in that there isn't really it's as you pointed out, it's in so much stronger a position, and that's going to make the United States' position as an interlocutor as some kind of extremely difficult. Uh, do you anticipate that in some way or another the conflict is going to be it's going to be kind of a hot, cold war where there's not going to be where the facts on the ground, as it were, are going to be are going to remain. There's going to be some probably low-level conflict, but that it will be not energetically pursued by Russia or Ukraine. Is that a possibility? That this
uh,
is just, yeah.
I think it's a very real one. If they can get to a point even where they establish a ceasefire along the line of contact, what then you're looking at for a generation or more, given the massive amounts of weapons that are floating around in Ukraine, you're not looking at a North Korea, South Korea sort of peaceful, steady divide. You're looking at the troubles. I think you're
Yeah.
looking at
Yeah.
something like that. I think that, Ukraine is basically teetering on the abyss, and it's really difficult to see, how they get out of it unless there's a push, to bring them into the EU somehow. The EU does not matter at all to the Russians. They think it's a joke. They don't necessarily really understand the point of it.
Right.
And that doesn't bother them, I believe, from what I've learned. That doesn't bother them in the least. It's NATO, because NATO means the United States, that bothers them. So unfortunately, we are now at the close, but I do appreciate you coming on. It's been a good discussion, and we'll have to come back maybe around Inauguration Day and see what the rest of the Trump cabinet looks like. So thanks very much.
Right. Yes. Well, thank you so much, James. And again, I don't know anyone who is as intelligent or knowledgeable on on U.S.-Russian relations, and specifically the position in Russia and in Ukraine than you. So this has been a great experience for me. But also, again, I'll just leave us with this idea that I am concerned about what the domestic situation in Ukraine in the mid and long term means for anything resembling peace in the region and for uh, the United States to be able to pursue any kind of coherent policy objectives.
Exactly. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Right. All right. Thank you, James.